Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Best English podcast. My name is Sophia, and it is wonderful to have you here today for our journey into the heart of the English language. I hope you're feeling comfortable and are ready to explore a topic that is on the mind of many English learners around the world. It's a question I receive all the time. Sophia, how can I stop sounding like I'm reading from a textbook? How can I speak English more naturally, more fluently, like a native speaker? It is the ultimate goal for many learners, to express yourself freely, with confidence, and to have the words flow out of you without hesitation, without the feeling of constant translation happening inside your head. Today, we are going to dive deep into this very topic. We will not be looking at grammar rules or vocabulary lists. Instead, we're going to talk about the real, practical things you can do to transform your speaking skills. We'll share stories, explore examples, and I'll guide you through some simple practices that will make a huge difference. This is not about achieving perfection overnight. It's about a profound shift in how you approach the language, making small, consistent changes that will unlock the fluent English speaker that is already inside you. So, take a deep breath, relax, and let's begin this adventure together. And if you enjoy what you hear today and want to make sure you never miss out on a new episode, be sure to hit that subscribe or follow button and turn on your notifications. It is the best way to stay connected and continue building your English skills with me. Let me start with a story about a student I once had named Carlos from Spain. Carlos was brilliant. His grammar was impeccable. He knew thousands of vocabulary words, and he could write fantastic, logically structured essays. But when it came to speaking, something was missing. It was as if there was a wall between his vast knowledge and his ability to express it in real time. He spoke very slowly, very deliberately, almost like a computer reading text. He would say things like, "Hello, how are you today? First Amendment, going to the supermarket." Every single word was pronounced perfectly, but it did not sound natural. It lacked the music of English. One day, we were having a conversation, and he was telling me about a holiday he took to the Swiss Alps. He showed me a photo on his phone, and it was stunning. He said, "The scenery was very beautiful. The mountains were big." I understood him perfectly, but his words did not match the incredible image I was seeing. A native speaker, filled with the memory of that view, might have said something more like, "The scenery was just breathtaking. The mountains were absolutely huge. You would not believe it." Do you hear the difference? It is not just the words. It is the rhythm, the emotion, the way the words connect and flow together like water. Carlos was so focused on being correct that he forgot to be expressive. His fear of making a single mistake was holding his fluency hostage. This brings us to the very heart of the matter, the first and most important step you must take. You have to change your mindset. You must give yourself permission to be imperfect. Think about how a child learns to speak their first language. Do they worry about the past perfect tense or subject-verb agreement? They do not. They are fearless explorers in the world of sound. They listen, they imitate, they make countless mistakes, and they slowly, naturally start to form sentences. They might say, "I go to the park," instead of "I went to the park." Does their mother correct them with a long grammar lesson? No. She understands the meaning, smiles, and says, "Oh, you went to the park? That's wonderful. What did you see?" The focus is on communication, on connection. As adult learners, we need to recapture a little bit of that childlike freedom. The fear of making a mistake is often the biggest barrier to fluency. It is a cage we build for ourselves. It freezes us. We have the right words swimming in our heads, but we are too scared to say them because we think, what if my pronunciation is wrong? What if I use the wrong preposition? What if they do not understand me? This fear creates a mental block. I remember a time when I was learning French. I was in a small bakery in Paris, and the air was thick with the warm, buttery smell of fresh pastries. All I wanted to do was buy a croissant. It seemed simple, but I was so nervous. My palms were sweating. I rehearsed the sentence in my head a dozen times. Je voudrais un croissant, s'il vous plaît. I was worried about my accent, about the rolling R sound. I finally got to the front of the line, and when the baker, a kind older woman with flour on her apron, looked at me with a smile, I panicked. The words would not come out. I pointed and mumbled something that probably sounded like nonsense. She just smiled, held up a croissant, and said, "Un croissant?" I nodded, paid, and practically ran out of the shop, my face bright red with embarrassment. For the rest of the day, I felt like a failure. But later that evening, sitting by the river Seine, eating my delicious croissant, I realized something. I had succeeded. The communication, in its most basic form, was successful. She understood what I wanted. My fear was the only thing that made the experience negative. From that day on, I made a promise to myself. I would focus on connection, not perfection. When you let go of that need to be perfect, something magical happens. You start to take risks. You try using new words. You experiment with different sentence structures, and yes, you will make mistakes. A lot of them. But each mistake is a learning opportunity. It is a stepping stone on your path to fluency. So, the very first piece of homework I want to give you is this. For the next week, I want you to try and speak English without fear. Find an opportunity, even a small one, to speak. It could be ordering a coffee, asking for directions, or even just talking to yourself. And when you speak, I want you to focus on one thing and one thing only: getting your message across. Do not worry about grammar. Do not worry about pronunciation. Just communicate. Embrace the mistakes. Laugh at them. Learn from them. This shift in mindset is the foundation upon which everything else is built. Hand in hand with embracing imperfection is finding your personal motivation, your why. Why are you learning English? A vague answer like "for a better job" often is not strong enough to push you through the difficult moments. You need a deeper, more emotional connection. I once coached a woman named Elena, a grandmother from Argentina. Her son had married an American woman, and they had 2 young children. Elena's English was very basic, and when she visited her family, she felt like an outsider. She would sit in the living room, surrounded by the cheerful noise of her family, but she was trapped behind a wall of silence. She could see her grandchildren laughing and playing, but she could not understand their jokes or read them a bedtime story. Her why was powerful and clear. She wanted to connect with her grandchildren. She wanted to be able to ask them about their day at school, to understand their favorite cartoons, and to tell them stories about her own childhood in Spanish, translated into simple English. This motivation was so strong that it overshadowed her fear of making mistakes. She was not practicing for a test. She was practicing for a hug, for a shared laugh. When you have a why that's strong, practice does not feel like a chore. It feels like a mission. So, take some time to think about it. What is your real reason? Is it to understand the lyrics of your favorite songs? To travel the world with confidence? To connect with a loved one? Find that reason, write it down, and put it somewhere you can see it every day. It will be the fuel that keeps your engine running. Now that we've set our foundation with a fearless, motivated mindset, let's move on to the actual sound of English. This is where we can begin to bridge the gap between textbook English and real natural English. The secret is not just about learning to pronounce individual words correctly, although that is important. The real secret lies in understanding the music of the language. English has a very specific rhythm and melody, what linguists call stress, rhythm, and intonation. Let's start with word stress. In English, not all syllables in a word are equal. In a multisyllable word, one syllable is always stressed more than the others. It's longer, louder, and often has a higher pitch. This stress can completely change the meaning of a word. Let me tell you about Javier, a bright young man from Colombia who is giving his very first business presentation in English. He was incredibly nervous. His topic was the company's financial performance over the last year. He wanted to begin by talking about the company's official record of sales, the noun with the stress on the first syllable, record. But as he stood up in front of his colleagues, his heart pounding, his mind went a little blank. He started speaking and he said, "Good morning. Today, I want to record our sales performance." He put the stress on the second syllable, turning the noun record into the verb record. The audience looked confused. A few people picked up their pens, as if they were being asked to write something down or start recording the meeting. Javier saw their confusion, which only made him more nervous. He tried again. "This record shows our profits." Again, he stressed the wrong syllable. The communication was broken before he even got to his main point, all because of one tiny shift in stress. Later, when we practiced, he learned to land on that first syllable with confidence. Let's look at the RE chord. It was a small change, but it made him sound instantly more authoritative and, most importantly, clear. This story perfectly illustrates that word stress is not just a minor detail for advanced learners. It is a fundamental part of being understood. This happens all the time in English. Think about the words present, a gift, and present, to give, or object, a thing, and object, to disagree. Many learners pronounce every syllable with the same force, but learning to identify and produce the correct stress will instantly make you sound more natural. To practice this, take a word you know, like beautiful. It's beautiful. The stress is on the first syllable. Say it out loud. Feel how that first part is stronger. Now try important. It's important. The stress is in the middle. Try understand. It's understand. The stress is at the end. Getting this right will instantly make you sound more natural. But it is not just about stress within a single word. It is about stress within a whole sentence. This is what creates the rhythm of English. English is a stress-timed language. This means that we tend to put the stress on the most important words in a sentence, the words that carry the meaning. These are usually nouns, main verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. We tend to glide over the smaller, less important words, the function words like the, in, of, is, are. Let's go back to Carlos. He said, "The scenery was very beautiful. He gave equal importance to every single word. A native speaker would naturally stress the key information. They would say something like, "The scenery was very beautiful." Can you hear that? The was very are all quick and unstressed. Scenery and beautiful are the stars of the show. They get the stress. It creates a kind of beat, da 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 da. This is the rhythm of English. It is like music. Imagine you're telling a friend about your day. You would not say, "I went to the store to buy some bread." You would say, "I went to the store to buy some bread." The key information, store and bread, gets the emphasis. Let's try a little practice together. I'm going to say a sentence, and I want you to repeat it, trying to copy my rhythm. Focus on the stressed words. Ready? I need to go to the bank to get some money. Again. I need to go to the bank to get some money. The important words are need, go, bank, money. The other words are quick and quiet. Try another one. She wrote a long letter to her best friend. The key words are wrote, long, letter, best friend. Practicing this rhythm will make a massive difference. You can do this by listening to native speakers, on podcasts, in movies, in songs, and trying to clap along to the rhythm of their sentences. Identify the stressed words. This is a technique called shadowing, which we'll talk more about later, but it is incredibly powerful for developing a natural rhythm. The third part of the music of English is intonation. Intonation is the melody of your voice, how your pitch goes up and down when you speak. It is how we show emotion, ask questions, and signal that we are finished speaking. If your intonation is flat, it can make you sound bored or uninterested. For example, in a simple statement, our voice typically falls at the end. I live in London. The pitch goes down on London. This tells the listener that I have finished my thought. But if I'm asking a question that can be answered with yes or no, my intonation will rise. Do you live in London? The pitch goes up on London. This signals to the other person that I am expecting an answer. Listen to the difference. I live in London. Do you live in London? This is a fundamental pattern. But intonation also carries subtle meaning, like sarcasm. If I genuinely think your idea is good, I'll say, "That's a great idea," with a high falling tone. But if I think it is a terrible idea, I might say, "That's a great idea," with a low, rising, drawn-out tone. The words are identical, but the melody completely reverses the meaning. We also use intonation to show emotion. If my friend tells me she won the lottery, I would not say, "That's amazing," with a flat tone. I would say, "That's amazing," with my voice rising and falling to show my excitement. We also use it for lists. If I'm listing things I bought, apples, bread, and milk, my voice will go up on each item to show there's more coming. And then it will fall on the last item to signal the end of the list. I bought apples, bread, and milk. Try it with me. I need to buy some paper, pens, and notebooks. This little melody makes your speech much easier for a native speaker to follow. It provides clues about what you mean and how you feel. A good way to practice this is to listen to short clips of conversations and try to draw the intonation pattern in the air with your finger. Does the voice go up? Does it go down? Trying to mimic these melodies will help internalize the patterns of English speech. It feels strange at first, but it is like learning to sing a new song. With practice, the melody becomes second nature. Let's tie all this together with something called connected speech. This is perhaps one of the biggest keys to sounding fluent, and it is something that is rarely taught in textbooks. When native speakers talk, they do not pronounce every single word perfectly and separately. The words flow together, they link, and sometimes sounds even change or disappear. This is what makes fast English so difficult to understand for learners. But it is also what makes it sound so smooth and natural. Let me give you an example. If you see the sentence, "What are you doing?" written down, you might be tempted to pronounce it, "What are you doing?" But a native speaker would almost never say it that way in a casual conversation. They would probably say, "What you doing?" The what and are and you all blend together to become whatcha. The G at the end of doing is often dropped in informal speech. This is not lazy or incorrect English. It is how the language works when spoken at a natural pace. This exact issue once caused a huge problem for a student of mine, Paolo, from Italy. He was visiting London for the first time, and he was a very diligent student. He knew all his grammar, but his listening practice had mostly been with slow, careful audio from textbooks. He was standing near Big Ben, feeling a bit lost, and he stopped a friendly-looking man to ask for directions to the nearest underground station. He asked very clearly, "Excuse me, sir, how do I get to the tube station?" The Londoner smiled and replied quickly, "Oh yeah, simple. You're gonna want to go right at the corner, and then it's just down the road." Paolo's face went blank. All he heard was a string of confusing sounds. "Gonna wanna." He had never heard these words before. He was expecting to hear, "You are going to want to go." He thought it must be some very complex local slang. He was too embarrassed to ask the man to repeat himself, so he just said, "Thank you," and walked away in complete confusion. He spent the next 20 minutes walking in the wrong direction. When he told me this story later, we broke it down. Gonna is just going to. Wanna is just want to. The man was saying, "You are going to want to go right," a very common, friendly way to give a suggestion. For Paolo, this was a massive aha moment. He realized that to understand real English, he had to stop listening for the individual words he learned in his book and start listening for the connected sounds that people actually use. This experience, born from confusion, was the best listening lesson he ever had. This is why listening is so important. You need to train your ear to hear these connections. You might know the words "I am," but you might not recognize them when a speaker says "I'm." You might know "give me," but you might not understand "gimme." Learning to hear and use these reductions, even just a few, will dramatically increase your fluency. A good way to start is to become aware of them. When you're listening to English, try to notice when words link together. A great phrase to practice with is "first of all." We do not say "first of all," we say "first of all." It is like one smooth word, or "I don't know." In fast speech, this often becomes "I don't know." Practice saying these phrases out loud. It might feel a bit strange at first, but this is how you build the muscle memory for natural connected speech. It is about letting go of the individual words and focusing on the flow of the entire phrase. Now, let's move on from the sound of English to the words we use. Vocabulary is essential. But to speak naturally, you need to go beyond the basic vocabulary you learn in a textbook. You need to start thinking in chunks, or what we call collocations and phrases. A collocation is a group of words that are frequently used together. Native speakers use them all the time without even thinking. For example, we do not say "make a photo." We say "take a photo." We do not say a strong rain, we say heavy rain. We make the bed, we do not do the bed. We feel deeply sorry, not very sorry. Learning these natural word pairings is a game changer. It makes your English sound much more authentic. When you learn a new word, do not just learn the word itself. Try to learn the words that go with it. For example, instead of just learning the word opportunity, learn the phrases a golden opportunity, a unique opportunity, or to miss an opportunity. When you learn the verb to spend, learn that you spend time or spend money. The more of these chunks you know, the less you have to think about building sentences word by word. You can just pull a whole phrase from your memory. This is one of the secrets to fluency. Fluent speakers are not necessarily translating faster in their heads. They are simply accessing larger chunks of language at once. To truly master this, I recommend starting a language journal instead of a simple vocabulary notebook. When you hear a new word or phrase you like, do not just write down the word and its definition. Write down the entire sentence you heard it in. Who said it? What was the situation? How did it make you feel? For example, you might be watching a movie where a character looks at a beautiful sunset and says, "It's absolutely breathtaking." In your journal, you'd write, "Absolutely breathtaking" means extremely beautiful. From the movie Island Sunset, the character said it while watching the sun go down. It sounds very powerful and emotional. Then, you could try to write your own sentence. The view from the top of the mountain was absolutely breathtaking. This method connects the vocabulary to an experience, a memory, and an emotion, which makes it far more likely that you'll remember it and be able to use it correctly and naturally in the future. Let's take this idea a step further and talk about idioms and phrasal verbs. These are the spice of the English language. They add color and personality to your speech. An idiom is a phrase where the meaning is not obvious from the individual words. For example, if I say it's raining cats and dogs, it means it's raining very heavily. But taking idioms literally can lead to some very funny situations. I once had a student named Isabel from France who had just started her first office job in Toronto. She was very eager to do a good job. On her first Friday, her manager was getting ready to leave and said to her, "Great work this week, Isabel. I'm heading out now. Can you hold down the fort until I'm back on Monday?" Isabel's eyes went wide. In her mind, a fort was a military castle, and holding it down sounded very serious, like she had to physically protect the office from attack. She was terrified. She did not want to look stupid by asking what he meant, so she just nodded seriously. She stayed long after everyone else had left, sitting nervously at her desk, guarding the empty office. When the nighttime security guard came by, she almost jumped out of her chair. The next morning, her boss arrived to find her asleep at her desk with a coffee cup in her hand. He was shocked and asked her what happened. When she explained, through her exhaustion, that she was holding down the fort, he burst out laughing. He explained that it just meant to take care of things while he was away. They both had a good laugh, and Isabel never forgot what that idiom meant. It is a funny story, but it shows how important it is to learn these phrases so you can understand the real, intended meaning in everyday situations. Phrasal verbs are another key feature of natural English. These are verbs made up of a main verb and a preposition or adverb like give up, look for, or get along with. Learners often find these difficult because the meaning can change completely. Native speakers use phrasal verbs constantly. Instead of saying, "I will collect you from the airport," they'd say, "I'll pick you up from the airport." Instead of saying, "I will continue working," they might say, "I'll carry on working." Just like with idioms, the best way to learn these is in context, through your language journal. It is about making the language a part of your own experience. One of the most powerful and yet often overlooked strategies for improving your speaking is to improve your listening. The two skills are deeply connected. You cannot produce a sound that you cannot first hear. This reminds me of a student named Omar from Egypt. He was a huge fan of the American TV comedy series, Friends. For months, he watched it with Arabic subtitles, and he enjoyed the show. Then, as a challenge, he switched to English subtitles. It was harder, but he started to connect the written English words with the sounds. The final step was the scariest. He turned off the subtitles completely. He told me the first few episodes were a real struggle. He felt like he was only catching 50% of the jokes, but he loved the show, so he persisted. He started to focus less on individual words and more on the overall context, the actors' expressions, and the rhythm of their speech. Something amazing happened. After watching a whole season that way, he went back and rewatched an early episode. He was shocked. He could suddenly understand almost everything. The jokes were funnier, he understood the fast-paced conversations, and he felt like he truly knew the characters. He had not opened a single textbook. He had trained his ear by immersing himself in something he genuinely enjoyed. This shows that listening practice does not have to be boring drills. It can be as simple as watching your favorite TV show. The key is to do it actively and consistently. The more you listen to English, the more you absorb its rhythm, its intonation, and its natural phrases. You start to develop an intuitive sense of what sounds right. The key is to listen actively. Do not just have English on in the background. Really pay attention. When you're listening to a podcast, like this one, listen for the things we've been talking about. Listen for the sentence stress. Where does the speaker put the emphasis? Listen for connected speech. Did you hear them use a reduction like gonna? When you hear a new phrase you like, pause the audio and put it in your language journal. Say it out loud a few times. Try to imitate the speaker's pronunciation and intonation exactly. This is active listening. Let me tell you about another student, Kenji from Japan. Kenji's biggest problem was that his speaking was very flat. He had a great vocabulary, but his intonation did not change, which made it hard to understand his emotions. I suggested he try a new technique. I told him to find a short clip from his favorite movie, a scene with a lot of emotion. His task was to become an actor. He had to listen to one line of dialogue, then pause and repeat it, trying to copy the actor's performance exactly. Not just the words, but the feeling behind the words. The anger, the sadness, the joy. At first, he felt very silly doing this. He would lock himself in his room so no one could hear him. But after a few weeks, something incredible started to happen. The melody of English started to seep into his own speech. He began to use intonation more naturally, not because he was thinking about the rules, but because he had started to feel the music of the language. This is an extreme form of active listening, but it works. So, we've talked about mindset, the music of the language, vocabulary, and the importance of listening. Now, let's talk about the most crucial part, practice. You can learn all the theory in the world, but if you do not actually open your mouth and speak, you will never become fluent. Speaking is a physical skill, just like playing the piano or learning to swim. It involves muscles, your tongue, your lips, your jaw. And just like any other muscle, they need to be trained. You need to build muscle memory. One of the best ways to do this, especially if you do not have anyone to talk to, is a technique called shadowing. It is simple but incredibly powerful. Here's how it works. You find a short audio clip of a native speaker. It could be from a podcast, an audiobook, or a speech. You play the audio and you try to speak at the exact same time as the speaker, like a shadow. You are not listening and then repeating. You are speaking with them. I had a student, Anya from Poland, who had a very strong accent and often spoke in a monotone, which she felt made her sound harsh or unfriendly, even when she was trying to be nice. She decided to try shadowing. She loved listening to audiobooks, so she chose a book narrated by a British actor with a very calm, melodic voice. She committed to shadowing him for just 10 minutes every single day. She did not focus on understanding every word. She focused on copying the sound, the rhythm, the gentle rise and fall of his voice. For the first 2 weeks, it felt chaotic and she felt silly, but she persisted. After a month, she recorded herself having a simple conversation and compared it to a recording she had made before she started. She was absolutely amazed. It was not that her accent was gone, but her speech had a new musicality to it. She was using intonation more naturally. Her rhythm was smoother, and the harsh edges she disliked were softening. A week later, a colleague at work who did not know about her practice said to her, "Anya, you sound so much clearer and easier to listen to these days." For Anya, this was the best feedback she could have received. It proved that her dedicated practice was making a real, noticeable difference. This is the power of shadowing. It is not about erasing who you are. It is about adding new tools to your communication toolbox, allowing you to express yourself more clearly and effectively. Another fantastic way to practice by yourself is simply to talk to yourself. This might sound a little crazy, but it is one of the most effective things you can do. You do not need a partner. You do not need to be afraid of making mistakes. It is just you. You can narrate your day. Okay, now I am getting out of bed. I am going to the kitchen to make some coffee. I think I will have toast for breakfast. It seems simple, but what you are doing is activating the English part of your brain. You are forcing yourself to think in English and to produce sentences. A great way to structure this is to practice storytelling. All human connection is based on stories. You can use a simple framework to practice telling stories about your life. One popular method is the STAR method: situation, task, action, result. For example, think about a challenge you faced at work. Situation: last week, our main client was very unhappy with our project. Task: I needed to fix the problem and make them happy again. Action: I organized a meeting, listened to their concerns, and created a new plan based on their feedback. Result: they loved the new plan, and now our relationship is stronger than ever. Practice telling these little stories out loud. It helps you organize your thoughts, and practice using transition words and past tense verbs in a natural context. Record yourself on your phone and then listen back. This can be a little scary, but it is so valuable. I had a student named Fatima who used this technique to prepare for a job interview. The interview was in English and she was terrified. So, for a week before the interview, she spent 15 minutes every day in front of a mirror, practicing her answers to common interview questions using the STAR method. She pretended I, her teacher, was the interviewer. She would ask herself, "So, Fatima, tell me about a time you solved a difficult problem." And then she would answer, out loud, to her reflection in the mirror, following the STAR structure. She practiced describing her strengths and weaknesses. She practiced talking about her previous work experience. By the time the real interview came, she was still nervous, but she was also prepared. The words came to her much more easily because she had already said them dozens of times. She had built that muscle memory. She got the job. And she told me later that talking to herself in the mirror was the single most helpful thing she did to prepare. So, do not be shy. Find a private space and start talking. It is a safe and incredibly effective way to build your fluency and confidence. Of course, while talking to yourself is great, you also need to practice with other people. This is where the real learning happens. Conversation is a dance. It is about listening and responding. It is about understanding and being understood. But what happens when that dance is interrupted? What do you do when there's a communication breakdown? This is something that happens even to native speakers, so it is essential to have a toolkit of phrases to help you navigate these moments. If you do not understand something, do not just nod and smile. It is much better to be honest. You can use polite phrases like, "I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that," or "Could you say that again a bit more slowly, please?" Or, "Could you explain what you mean by the difficult word?" On the other hand, if you feel that the other person is not understanding you, you can check in with them. You can say, "Does that make sense?" Or you can try rephrasing your idea. "Let me put it another way." Or, in other words, a great strategy is to confirm your understanding. You can say, "So, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that." This shows you are actively listening and gives the other person a chance to clarify. Having these phrases ready will make you feel so much more confident because you know you have a way to repair the conversation if it breaks. I want to share one last story with you about myself. When I was first starting to get serious about learning Spanish, I was living in a city with a large Spanish-speaking community. But I was too shy to talk to anyone. I would go to the local market where the air was filled with the sounds of lively chatter in Spanish, and I would just listen. I did this for weeks. I was too scared to even buy a tomato. One day, I was looking at some mangoes, and an elderly woman next to me picked one up, smelled it, and said to me in Spanish, "They are very sweet today." My heart started beating so fast. This was my chance. I could just nod and smile, or I could try to respond. I took a deep breath and I said in very broken, nervous Spanish, "Yes, they look delicious." She smiled at me, a big, warm smile, and started telling me about her secret recipe for mango salsa. I probably only understood about half of what she said, but I stood there and listened and nodded and tried to ask simple questions. It was only a 5-minute conversation, but for me, it was a huge victory. I had broken through my wall of fear. That small interaction gave me the confidence to try again. The next week, I went back to the market and I bought some tomatoes, and I did it all in Spanish. The journey to fluency is made up of thousands of these small moments, these small acts of courage. Each one of these moments is a tiny seed of confidence. When you water that seed with consistent practice, it grows into a strong, healthy tree of fluency. So let's talk more about what that consistent practice can look like, especially when it comes to finding people to talk with. Finding a language exchange partner is one of the most wonderful tools we have in our modern world. But how do you make it work? It is not just about finding someone and saying, hello. A good language exchange is a partnership. I remember two students who connected through an app. A young woman named Sun Hee from South Korea and a man named David from Canada. At first, their conversations were a little awkward. They would mostly talk in English because David's Korean was at a very low level, and Sun Hee felt pressured to practice. After a few weeks, they almost gave up. But then they had an idea. They decided to add structure to their weekly calls. They agreed on a rule. The first 30 minutes would be dedicated entirely to English. David was not allowed to speak a single word of Korean, and his job was to be a helpful, patient conversation partner for Sun Hee. He would ask her questions, gently correct her mistakes, and teach her new phrases. Then, for the next 30 minutes, they would switch completely. Sun Hee would become the teacher. They would only speak Korean. This simple structure changed everything. It removed the awkwardness and created a balanced partnership. They also decided to have a topic for each conversation. One week they would describe their favorite movies. The next week they would debate the pros and cons of living in a big city. This meant they both came to the conversation with some ideas and vocabulary prepared, which made the conversation flow much more smoothly. Over time, they did not just become language partners, they became good friends. Sun Hee's confidence in English skyrocketed because she had a safe, supportive space to practice every single week. She learned to tell jokes, to express her opinions, and to understand David's Canadian accent. So, if you find a language partner, I encourage you to create a similar structure. It ensures that both people benefit, and it turns a simple chat into a powerful learning session. But what happens in those moments when you're not with your language partner? What do you do for the other 167 hours in the week? This brings us to a concept that is the true secret to unlocking the highest levels of fluency. It is the process of learning to think in English. If you are still thinking in your native language and then translating every sentence into English before you speak, you will always be one step behind the conversation. It is like trying to run a race while carrying a heavy backpack. The translation process is slow, tiring, and it prevents you from ever achieving that effortless flow. Fluency happens when you close the gap, when the thought itself originates in English. This may sound impossible, but it is a skill, and like any skill, it can be trained with a simple, step-by-step process. You do not start by trying to think about complex philosophical ideas in English. You start small, very small. The first step is to simply start labeling the world around you in English, silently, in your head. As you're sitting in your room, look around. Do not just see the objects. Name them in English in your mind. Wall, window, lamp, book, computer. That's it. Do this for a few days. It seems almost too simple to be effective, but what you're doing is building a direct connection between the object and the English word, bypassing your native language completely. You're training your brain to see a bed and think bed, not to see a bed. Think of the word for it in your language, and then translate it to bed. Once you're comfortable with that, you move to the next step, making simple sentences in your head. Continue to observe the world around you, but now form a basic sentence about it. The wall is white. The sun is shining through the window. My book is on the table. Again, this is all happening silently in your mind. You can do this anywhere. When you're on the bus, you can think, I am on a bus. That man is wearing a red coat. The bus is turning left. You are becoming a silent narrator of your own life in English. This practice, done consistently, starts to forge new pathways in your brain. You're building the habit of thinking in English. The third step is to move on to more complex thoughts. This is where you can start having internal monologues. Instead of just narrating what you see, start narrating what you're doing and what you're planning. In the morning, you can think to yourself, okay, it's time to wake up. First, I'm going to brush my teeth, and then I need to make some coffee. I wonder what I should wear today. I have that important meeting at 10 a.m., so I should probably wear a nice shirt. You're essentially having a conversation with yourself, but you're doing it all in English. This is where the magic really starts to happen. You will find that you do not have the word for something. You'll be thinking, I need to. What's that thing you use to make toast? And then you can look it up. Toaster. Excellent. You've just learned a new word in a completely natural, context-driven way. You had a need for the word, and you found it. This is a much more powerful way to learn vocabulary than memorizing a list. I had a student, May from China, who diligently practiced these thinking exercises for months. She told me she felt like she was making progress, but she was waiting for a sign, a moment when it all clicked. That moment came in a very unexpected way. She was in her kitchen, making dinner for her family. She was chopping vegetables and listening to an English podcast. She reached for a glass, but her hands were wet, and it slipped, shattering on the floor. Without a single thought, the word that flew out of her mouth was, oops! Just, oops! A second later, she froze. She stood there, surrounded by broken glass, and just stared into space. Her husband ran into the room, asking in Mandarin what had happened. It took her a moment to even respond to him. She later told me that in that moment she was in shock, not because she broke a glass, but because her instinctive, automatic reaction was in English. It was not translated from Mandarin. It was a pure, direct English reaction. For her, that one little word, oops, was more proof of her fluency than passing any exam. It was the sign that English was becoming a part of her subconscious mind. This is the tipping point that you are aiming for. I will never forget the first time I realized I was truly thinking in another language. I had been living in Spain for about 6 months, immersing myself completely. I was studying, listening, and speaking every single day. One night, I had a dream. In the dream, I was in a crowded market, just like that one where I had my small victory. I was talking to a shopkeeper, arguing about the price of some oranges. We were laughing and gesturing, and the entire conversation was in Spanish. When I woke up, I was stunned. I was not consciously trying to speak Spanish in my dream, it just happened. My brain had become so used to processing the world through Spanish that it had even started to dream in it. That's when I knew I had crossed a major threshold. It was a sign that the language was no longer just a tool I was using. It was becoming a part of how my mind worked. This is the goal: to make English an operating system that can run in the background of your mind. It takes time and it takes deliberate practice, starting with those simple labels and sentences. but it is the most direct path to true, effortless fluency. Now, as we get to these more advanced levels of fluency, we have to recognize that speaking like a native speaker is not just about the words and sounds. It is also about understanding the culture behind the language. This is something we can call cultural fluency. Language and culture are completely intertwined. The way people use language, what they talk about, how direct they are, what they find funny, is all shaped by their culture. Understanding this can be the difference between a smooth, successful conversation and an awkward, confusing one. A perfect example of this is the concept of small talk. In many cultures, like in Germany or Russia, for example, people tend to be quite direct. If you go into a shop, you say what you want, you pay, and you leave. There is no need for extra conversation. But in cultures like the United States, the UK, or Australia, small talk is a very important social ritual. It is the light conversation we have with people we do not know very well, a cashier, a stranger in an elevator, or a colleague you meet by the coffee machine. It is a way of being friendly and showing that you're open to connection. I once worked with a brilliant engineer from Japan named Hiro. He was technically excellent, his English grammar was perfect, but he struggled in his American office. He told me, "Sophia, my colleagues are so strange. They keep asking me, 'How's it going?' But then they walk away before I can tell them. And they are always talking about the weather. Why? We can all see the weather outside." Hiro did not understand the function of small talk. He thought, "How's it going?" was a genuine question that required a detailed answer. He did not realize it is often just another way of saying hello. And talking about the weather is not about exchanging information. It is about acknowledging the other person and sharing a very brief, neutral social experience. Once Hiro understood this, it changed his whole perspective. He learned to respond to, "How's it going?" with a simple, "Good, thanks. How about you?" He started to initiate small talk himself. He'd say to a colleague, "Wow, it's really raining out there today, is not it?" And he found that these small, seemingly meaningless interactions actually helped him build better relationships with his team. They started to see him as more friendly and approachable. So, learning the art of small talk, how to start it, what topics are safe, and how to end it, is a key part of sounding natural in many English-speaking environments. Another aspect of cultural fluency is understanding levels of politeness and directness. English, particularly British English, is famous for its use of indirect language. A person might say, "I was wondering if you might possibly have a moment to look at this report," when what they really mean is, "Please look at this report now." Or they might say, "I'm not so sure that's the best idea," which can often mean, "That's a terrible idea." For learners who come from more direct cultures, this can be very confusing. Let me tell you about Klaus, a very efficient project manager from Germany who I coached. He was temporarily assigned to his company's office in Manchester, in the UK. Klaus was used to a very direct style of communication. In Germany, if you disagree with an idea, you say, "I disagree with this idea. Here is why." It is seen as honest and efficient. In his first big meeting in Manchester, his British manager was presenting a new project timeline. Klaus saw a major flaw in it. So, when his manager asked for feedback, Klaus said, "That timeline is impossible. It will not work." The room went completely silent. Klaus could feel the atmosphere change. His manager's face tightened, and he just said, "Right. Thank you for your directness, Klaus. We'll move on." For the rest of the week, Klaus felt that his colleagues were avoiding him. His manager was polite, but very distant. Klaus was confused. He thought he was being helpful. Later, I explained the cultural code to him. His manager's question for feedback was an invitation for gentle suggestions, not a direct criticism. And when Klaus said, "That is impossible," his British colleagues heard, "You are incompetent and your plan is stupid." A more culturally fluent way to express the same point would have been something like, "Thank you for sharing that. I see the logic, but I'm just a little concerned about the deadline for stage 3. Could we perhaps explore some alternative options to make sure we have enough time?" The meaning is the same, but the delivery is softer, less confrontational. For Klaus, this was a hard lesson, but an invaluable one. It taught him that fluency is not just about speaking correct English, it is about speaking appropriate English for the cultural context you are in. Let's also circle back for a moment and go a little deeper into pronunciation. While having a perfect native accent is not the goal, being clearly understood is. There are a few key sounds in English that are notoriously difficult for many learners, and working on them can make a huge impact on your overall clarity. The most famous one is probably the wash sound. There are two th sounds, the unvoiced sound as in think and 3, and the voiced sound as in this and that. For the unvoiced th in think, you need to place the very tip of your tongue gently between your front teeth and blow air out. It is just air, no vibration from your vocal cords. The think. For the voiced in this, the tongue position is the same, but this time you make a sound with your vocal cords, creating a vibration. This. It feels very strange for speakers of languages that do not have this sound. Many learners substitute it with a T or sound, saying, "I sink" instead of "I think," or a D sound, saying dis instead of this. This can sometimes cause confusion. I had a student who was trying to tell me he was 30 years old, but he kept saying he was dirty. We had a good laugh about it once he realized, and we practiced the th sound until he got it right. The key is physical practice. Look in a mirror. Watch your tongue. It is a motor skill, and you have to train your mouth to do something new and unfamiliar. Another common challenge is with vowel sounds. English has a lot of them, and some are very close to each other. The classic example is the difference between the short I sound in a word like ship or live and the long E sound in a word like sheep or leave. For the short I in ship, your mouth is relaxed. I, ship. For the long E in sheep, you need to smile a little. Your mouth is wider and your tongue is higher and more tense. Sheep. The difference is crucial. Asking someone where you can find a sheep to go to an island is very different from asking for a ship. Practicing these with minimal pairs of words that are different by only one sound, is extremely effective. Repeat after me: ship, sheep, live, leave, it, eat, his, he's. Hearing the difference and then training your mouth to produce the difference is a fantastic way to fine-tune your pronunciation and make your speech much clearer and more accurate. Remember, the goal is not to erase your accent. Your accent is a part of who you are. The goal is clarity. It is about ensuring that your pronunciation does not create a barrier to communication, so that people can focus on the wonderful ideas you're sharing, not struggle to understand the words you're saying. Ultimately, this entire journey, from changing your mindset to mastering the sound, is about building confidence. Every little piece we've discussed is a block. You lay the foundation with a fearless attitude, powered by your why. You build the walls with the music of the language, rhythm, and intonation. You furnish the rooms with rich, contextual vocabulary from your language journal, idioms, and phrasal verbs. You install the windows by becoming a great listener. You live in the house by practicing every single day, telling stories and talking to yourself. And you make it a home by learning to think in English and understanding the culture of its inhabitants. It is a long and challenging process, but it is also one of the most rewarding things you can ever do. To be able to connect with people from a different culture, to understand their stories, and to share your own, to navigate the world with a new sense of freedom and possibility. That is the true gift of learning a language. It is about more than just speaking. It is about becoming a more open, curious, and connected version of yourself. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today on the Best English podcast. I hope you found our conversation helpful and that you're feeling inspired to take the next step on your English learning journey. Remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Be kind to yourself, celebrate your progress, and never forget why you started this journey in the first place. My challenge for you this week is to choose just one thing, one strategy we talked about today, and focus on it. Maybe you'll start your language journal. Maybe you'll practice telling a short story using the STAR method. Or maybe you'll find the courage to start a short conversation in English. Whatever you choose, just take that one small step. I would love to hear about your progress and your experiences. You can always reach out to us through our website or on social media. And if you enjoyed this episode and want to continue learning with me, please make sure you are subscribed and have your notifications turned on. It really helps the podcast grow and ensures that you will not miss our next lesson together. This is Sophia, wishing you a wonderful day filled with learning and discovery. Keep practicing, keep believing in yourself, and I'll talk to you again soon. Goodbye for now.